One admiral, 6 months. Fail to crush the U.S. Pacific Fleet before then, and shipyards across the ocean will pour out carriers faster than Japan can crew them. He orders the carriers east. Battleships sink at anchor, and the nation that should have buckled hardens overnight. Stay with this, and you'll see how one wrong bet on American will turn early triumphs into a road that ends with fire over Tokyo and surrender. Before the first torpedo dropped at Pearl Harbor, Imperial Navy planners had argued for decades about a single decisive battle. The doctrine promised that a concentrated strike would lure the U.S. fleet into range and destroy it in one climactic exchange. Isoroku Yamamoto knew the math behind the myth because he had studied in the United States from 1919 to 1921 and served as a naval attaché in Washington later in the 1920s. His letters and briefings in late 1940 and 1941 warned that Japan could not outlast American industry. He accepted that if war came anyway, only a sudden shock, so severe that Washington sought terms, offered any chance. It was not optimism. It was a grim wager forced by resource limits and a government drifting toward conflict. Japanese strengths at the outset were real. The first air fleet, Kido Butai, assembled 6 carriers and air crews trained to operate as a single striking arm. Concentration, radio discipline, and rehearsed deck handling let them launch roughly 353 aircraft in 2 waves. Torpedo bombers used weapons tuned to run in shallow water, and dive bombers drilled endlessly to hit ships at anchor. The logic imagined America as a distant giant with long lines and a public that would recoil at losses. Admirals in Tokyo debated the fatigue of a democracy, the delays of mobilization, and the hope that a negotiated settlement could freeze gains before factories made the ocean American. In their view, distance was a weapon. But the other logic, Yamamoto's, measured oil, pilots, and training pipelines. Japan depended on captured fields in Southeast Asia and lifelines of tankers to keep the fleet moving. Every carrier lost was not just steel. It was an air group of veterans that took years to replace. The United States, by contrast, could repair and replace at a rate Japan could not match. Cryptanalysis lurked as a hidden lever that undercut dreams of one decisive blow. U.S. codebreakers worked on JN-25, the main Japanese naval code, turning fragments into forecasts. The name Joseph Rochefort surfaced in those rooms at Pearl Harbor, where analysts argued for Midway as the next objective and took the risk of a ruse to confirm it. At sea, procedures decided survival. The U.S. Navy learned to refuel at sea, to cycle combat air patrols, and to break carrier groups into flexible task forces. Japanese doctrine emphasized the offensive strike, but lagged in radar deployment and pilot replacement, and damage control practices on some ships were unforgiving under fire. Submarines became the quiet accountants of the war. American boats stalked tankers and freighters, and by war's end they had sunk about 55% of Japan's merchant tonnage, starving industry and garrisons. The equation was brutal: no fuel, no fleet, no steel, no planes. By 1942, the clock Yamamoto set for himself ticked loudly. Early gains gave Japan time to dig in, but they also stretched lines across vast seas that had to be fed by ships and protected by air. With each month, American yards accelerated. The tragedy inside the Japanese calculus was not ignorance of American metal. It was a misread of American will. Casualty figures could wound a democracy, the admirals thought. Instead, they welded it. The carriers form up in the North Pacific and swing south with decks stacked wingtip to wingtip. And this is the knife edge where our story snaps forward. If you want the rest of the run as it crests, subscribe now and hold on. Dawn over Oahu arrives with engines already warm. The First Air Fleet under Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo launches in 2 waves, and the attack unfolds with ruthless precision. Torpedoes streak into battleships, dive bombers rake airfields, ships burn while defenders scramble into the air too late to change the morning. Smoke rises from Pearl Harbor as 2,403 Americans lie dead, and yet the core U.S. carriers are not in port. Across the mainland, recruiting stations fill, shipyards surge, and politicians speak with a single voice. The strike that was supposed to unnerve the target binds it. Through the opening months, Japan moves fast. Forces flood into Southeast Asia and the Netherlands East Indies, locking down oil and rubber and seizing ports. Strategy depends on momentum and shock, and for a while it holds. May 1942 brings the first check at the Coral Sea. Japanese plans to take Port Moresby run into U.S. task forces 16 and 17, and the first carrier versus carrier battle in history plays out with fleets never seeing each other. Aircraft from both sides search, find, and hit, and by nightfall Japan loses the light carrier Shoho, while Shokaku is damaged and Zuikaku's air group is depleted. The United States pays with Lexington and a battered Yorktown. Neither side leaves with an easy story to tell, but one fact stands on the map. The invasion of Port Moresby is turned back. The aura of unstoppable advance flickers. The loss of air crews, not just hulls, starts to bite. Intelligence work sharpens its edge in June. U.S. cryptanalysts at Pearl Harbor argue that AF is Midway, and a faked message about a water shortage confirms it. Admiral Chester W. Nimitz sets a trap, sending Enterprise and Hornet of Task Force 16 and Yorktown of Task Force 17 under Raymond Spruance and Frank Jack Fletcher to a patch of ocean where Japanese carriers expect an empty sky. On June 4, 1942, the sea is a chessboard under clouds. Nagumo juggles strike loads as reports conflict. Scouts are late. Decisions stack up under pressure. When U.S. dive bombers finally drop from altitude, they find Japanese decks crowded with fueled planes and armed torpedoes. In a handful of minutes, Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu ignite under bomb hits, and crews fight flames that run like rivers. Hiryu lashes back, sending strikes that smash Yorktown. But the reprieve is brief. By the next day, Hiryu is also mortally hit, and 4 Japanese fleet carriers go under, along with the heart of their veteran air crews. The strategic weather changes. Japan still has formidable ships, including the massive battleship Yamato, but the carrier arm cannot regrow veterans on demand. America, bruised, is now on offense. Guadalcanal begins on August 7, 1942, with Marines stepping onto jungle airstrips that will become Henderson Field. The Cactus Air Force forms from whatever can fly, and by day it claws at Japanese supply runs. At night, the Tokyo Express hurtles down the slot under cover of darkness. Naval battles in Iron Bottom Sound cost both sides, but the arithmetic is cruel to Tokyo. Freighters dodge submarines. Destroyers try to run supplies in drums that bob toward shore. Pilots fresh from shortened training meet experienced American flyers improving tactics with every sortie. Japanese crews show grit and skill, but the attrition never stops. By February 1943, evacuations begin under rain and radar, and the island stays in American hands. In April, an order arrives that turns intelligence into bullets. Yamamoto plans an inspection swing to boost morale in the Solomons, and American codebreakers read his itinerary with enough detail to set an ambush. On April 18, 1943, long-range P-38 Lightnings skim low over the ocean and climb to meet a formation of Mitsubishi G-4M Betty bombers. The interception over Bougainville is quick and clinical. Fighters find the bomber carrying the combined fleet commander and rake it. The aircraft spirals into the jungle, and the admiral who understood America best dies on schedule set by a decoded message. Leadership passes to others, but the strategic bind does not ease. Carriers remain in commission, but air groups are thin. Ships consume fuel that submarines are increasingly choking off. 1944 shifts the center of gravity to the Marianas. The United States pushes across the Central Pacific, carving airfields on Saipan, Tinian, and Guam to bring the Boeing B-29 Superfortress within reach of Japan. Admiral Raymond A. Spruance's Fifth Fleet locks onto the Japanese mobile fleet, and Operation Ago launches to smash the invasion. On June 19th to 20th, 1944, the Battle of the Philippine Sea explodes into the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Japanese pilots in large waves find radar-guided fighters and layered anti-aircraft fire. Hundreds of aircraft go down, survivors ditch at sea, and even successful attackers come home to empty decks. American submarines lurk as the air battle rages. The fleet carrier Taiho takes a torpedo. Fumes build and detonate. Shokaku is hit and burns. Hayo follows. By night's end, 3 carriers are gone, and the experience gap has turned into a cliff. On land, the Marianas fall one by one. B-29S lift off from new fields, and by March 1945, firebombing of Tokyo on the night of 9 to 10 March kills an estimated 80,000 to 100,000 or more and levels huge swaths of the city. Industrialized air power burns across maps once thought beyond reach. Meanwhile, the U.S. Navy targets what keeps wars alive: shipping. Submarines patrol the routes from the East Indies, pick off tankers, and send freighters to the bottom. Convoys cannot make good the loss, and factories go idle. Leyte draws the remnant of the Imperial Navy into one last gamble. In October 1944, Japanese plans, Shogo operations, send multiple forces toward the American landings, hoping to split and pound them at their most vulnerable. The geography tightens around Sibuyan Sea, Surigao Strait, Samar, and Cape Engano. Night along Surigao Strait, old American battleships cross the T and rake advancing columns with radar-directed fire. Off Samar, a small group of escort carriers and destroyers runs into battleships and heavy cruisers and fights with smoke, torpedoes, and grit while calling for help. To the north, at Cape Engano, Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa dangles a decoy carrier force that draws off Halsey's fast carriers. The result spreads across the archipelago. The Japanese surface fleet is shattered as actions pile up and retreating ships list away, and the initiative at sea ends for good. Out of options, Tokyo authorizes a new tactic. On October 25, 1944, organized kamikaze operations begin at Leyte. A diving aircraft tears into the escort carrier USS St. Lo, CVE-63, and the ship goes down under blast and fire. Vice Admiral Takijiro Onishi frames the tactic as a way to trade one pilot for one ship, but the attrition equation does not change. From the Marianas, B-29s increase pressure. By spring 1945, raids lay waste to dozens of cities. The ocean around Japan becomes a minefield. Ports blink out. Trains stop for lack of fuel. Summer holds a final cascade. On August 6, 1945, a B-29 named Enola Gay drops Little Boy over Hiroshima. 3 days later, Boxcar drops Fat Man over Nagasaki, and fire and shock roll over 2 cities in a war already burning everything in its path. Between those dates, the Soviet Union declares war and launches into Manchuria on August 8 to 9, 1945. The Kwantung Army crumples in days under a mechanized assault. Military options vanish. In Tokyo, the cabinet stares at maps piled with red. Messages from the front read like eulogies for ships and divisions. The belief that America would recoil from loss is gone. Instead, America has mobilized and kept coming. Admirals who had championed the decisive battle thesis face the ledger. Oil is gone, pilots are gone, ships are gone. What remains are civilians facing air raids and leaders looking for a way to end it. The emperor speaks, and Japan accepts the terms. Across harbors, flags are lowered, and ships, some scuttled, some surrendered, sit empty of purpose. For the men who sailed in the combined fleet, the war that began with 10 minutes of torpedoes now ends in silence. In the days after the surrender, surviving Japanese naval leaders were interrogated and demobilized. Many admitted the early war optimism and described Yamamoto's warnings as the coldest voice in the room. The misread mattered because it shaped every major decision from Pearl Harbor to Leyte Gulf. It set a timetable that conceded the long war the United States was built to win. Allied navies adjusted doctrine around carriers, radar, and logistics, while code-breaking became a permanent pillar of planning. Japan's post-war forces emphasized joint sustainment and defense over gambles for a single stroke. The takeaway is hard and simple. Never plan a short war against a country built to fight a long one, and never anchor strategy in an opponent's imagined collapse. Count the factories and the training pipelines as carefully as the ships. For more hard looks at the decisions that decided the Pacific War, subscribe